Morgan was not a writer. He was a simple man, content with the quiet routine of his life. He worked as a librarian, surrounded by the comforting silence of books. He enjoyed the weight of them in his hands, the scent of aging paper and ink. He appreciated the stories they held, but he never felt the urge to tell his own. Then, one day, everything changed. Words began to flow from him, spilling onto paper in a torrent of vivid imagery and unsettling dread. He wrote feverishly, as if possessed by an unknown force. The result was a manuscript, strange and terrifying, a story titled "The Thing in the Moonlight." The manuscript told the story of Howard Phillips, a man trapped in a recurring dream. Or was it a dream? Phillips found himself in a desolate landscape, an endless expanse of marshes and twisted trees. He was drawn, inexorably, toward a distant cliff. He could sense eyes watching him from the shadows, hear whispers carried on the wind. Fear gnawed at the edges of his sanity. He knew, with chilling certainty, that something was terribly wrong.
I can feel it. Something is watching me. This place. It's not right. Something is terribly wrong.
Phillips's dream was vivid, painted in shades of gray and black. The marshes stretched out before him, shrouded in an unnatural mist. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of decay. The trees, gnarled and ancient, clawed at the sky with skeletal fingers. Above it all, the moon hung like a watchful eye, casting long, distorted shadows across the landscape. It was a place of palpable dread, a nightmare given form.
This place, it's like a painting of despair. The shadows, they seem to move to watch me.
As Phillips stumbled through the marsh, he began to hear voices. They were faint at first, carried on the wind. Whispers, murmurs, fragments of conversations that made no sense. They seemed to slither around him, toying with his sanity. The voices grew louder as he approached the cliff, a cacophony of whispers that threatened to overwhelm him. They spoke of things unseen, of ancient evils and unspeakable horrors.
What are these voices? They speak of things I can't understand. It's driving me mad.
Keep moving, Howard. Don't let the whispers consume you. There's something you need to find, something important.
The voices, relentless and insidious, continued to echo in his mind as he moved closer to the edge of the cliff, the sense of dread growing with every step. Driven by a force he couldn't comprehend, Phillips finally reached the cliff.
It rose up before me, a sheer wall of rock that seemed to pierce the very sky.
At its base, he discovered a set of rusted rails, disappearing into the distance.
A streetcar, its paint peeling and its windows dark, sat on the tracks. It was an anachronism, a piece of the familiar world intruding upon this nightmare.
As Phillips watched, figures began to emerge from the streetcar.
They were vaguely humanoid, but twisted and grotesque. Their skin was stretched taut over bones, their eyes glowed with an unnatural light.
They moved with a disconcerting fluidity, their limbs bending at impossible angles.
I recoiled in horror, my mind struggling to process the sight. These were creatures of nightmare, things that should not exist.
Phillips's terror deepened as he realized these were not merely figments of his imagination, but beings from a realm beyond understanding.
Phillips tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. He was trapped, a prisoner in his own mind. He tried to wake himself, but the dream held him fast. He was lost in a labyrinth of his own subconscious, tormented by creatures born of his deepest fears. But where did the dream end and reality begin? The line between the two seemed to blur, becoming as indistinct as the shadows that danced at the edge of his vision.
Morgan, upon finishing the manuscript, was left shaken and disturbed. The story of Howard Phillips was too vivid, too real. He couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't written the story, but rather transcribed it from some dark corner of his mind. He considered destroying the manuscript, consigning it to the flames and trying to forget the horrors it contained. But something held him back. A morbid curiosity, perhaps, or a sense of responsibility to the story itself. He tried to find Howard Phillips, to determine if he was real or simply a figment of his imagination. He searched for any record of him, any proof that he existed outside the pages of the manuscript. but his search proved fruitless, leading him down dead ends and leaving him with more questions than answers. The experience left him questioning his own sanity, wondering if the thin veil that separated reality from nightmare was as impenetrable as he once believed. The manuscript remained on his desk, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked at the edge of perception. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched, that something unseen was observing him from the shadows. He was haunted by the story of Howard Phillips, by the creatures that stalked his dreams, by the fear that lingered long after the last page had been turned. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred, and he feared he might never find his way back.